Can you believe that it's actually been over 24 years now since the first release of the Visual Pinball emulator by programmer Randy Davis back on December 19th, 2000? Since then, a large virtual pinball hobbyist community has developed worldwide. People like you and I are able to recreate original pinball tables in digital format. The most impressive aspect of this is that they were able to utilize the original ROMs, meaning the firmware that was running on the original pinball machines. The Visual Pinball emulator also allowed the community to create tables that never existed as a mechanical machine. You can literally find over 2,000 visual pinball tables to be downloaded for free from various forums online if you do a search on the key term VPX tables. So let's talk about virtual pinball, which is what today's buyer's guide is all about. It's the hardware platform that supports the Visual Pinball emulator, such as the cabinet, the haptic devices on the inside, solenoids, shaker motors, gear motors, you name it, surround sound speakers, of course, the gaming PC itself, everything that makes the experience of running Visual Pinball emulator as realistic as possible. You have two choices when it comes to virtual pinball hardware. You can either go out and build it yourself, which is extremely time consuming and often very frustrating for most people, especially when it comes to installing and configuring the software. For those of you who want to build your own virtual pinball machine, there are great resources online such as the Pinscape version 2 build guide that will take you step by step through that process. For those of you who do not have the time and want a plug-and-play virtual pinball cabinet, this guide is for you. Shopping for a virtual pinball machine can be extremely confusing. First of all, if you do a search online for virtual pinball, you're going to be bombarded with about 20 to 30 different vendors, starting with prices as low as $500-$600 for these small at-games machines, all the way up to over $10,000. Cabinet sizes vary greatly from vendor to vendor, and what makes it even worse is every single one of them claims to have the best product. I'm sure you will all agree that this wide range of price differences means that simply cannot be true. I will go a step further and say that many of you who've actually tried a physical virtual pinball machine have walked away extremely disappointed. In fact, 95% of all virtual pinball machines that are commercially sold do not even come anywhere close to the real touch and feel of a mechanical pinball machine. The great news, however, is that there is a commercially available plug-and-play virtual pinball machine out there in the marketplace that does achieve the true touch and feel of a mechanical pinball machine. In other words, there are clear leaders in this industry. So if you're interested in understanding in detail what constitutes a world-class virtual pinball machine and what makes it feel like a real mechanical machine, then please stick around. We will be discussing the form factor, size, and shapes of various units out there, how this affects the touch and feel realism of a machine, what features are available, do they have on-off switches, what type of peripherals are included, is the software complete, does it get updated, the support, reputation of the company, easy access to their support team and length of warranty, things like the build quality, what materials do they use, components, what are the specifications of the PC, time to delivery, and pricing strategies. Let's discuss the form factor first. Does the actual virtual pinball machine you're considering look like a traditional pinball machine? Does it have the same size? Does it fit in with mechanical machines? One of the main reasons for shorter cabinets is the use of 43-inch monitors instead of the 49-inch monitors that provide you with the proper depth. The average mechanical pinball machine has a 42-inch deep playfield, and that can only be reproduced with 49-inch monitors. We highly recommend that has a slanted playfield monitor, just like the original mechanical machines. Another form factor consideration are edge-to-edge monitors. Avoid thick bezeled monitors that show the brand name. Anything less than a 32-inch backglass monitor should be avoided as well. And you really want a Stern type full-size DMD display monitor. DMD standing for dot matrix display. This is this display where you have your scoring in between the playfield and the backglass monitor. Last but not least, on the form factor side of things, you want a cabinet that has the proper height. I'm talking about adjustable legs that are sturdy enough to be able to allow you to nudge the cabinet. Everything that you would normally find in a mechanical unit should be present in your virtual pinball form factor as well. Now let's address the touch and feel aspect of a virtual pinball machine. You can all agree that the touch and feel of a virtual pinball machine is indeed the most important aspect. Let's start with the material used to build the actual cabinet. A lot of vendors out there use cheap materials like MDF or strand board, particle board, when in reality what you really want is actual 7-layer plywood that will allow the force feedback devices to reverberate properly through the walls. So do not settle for anything less than plywood when it comes to your virtual pinball cabinetry. Let me remind you that this is the case on actual mechanical pinball machines anyway, so make sure you insist on plywood. Next, let's talk about the DOF devices, also known as the device output framework, that are responsible for force feedback based on gameplay. It is important that all the devices that I'm about to discuss are actually included or made available to you. Solenoids, a shaker motor, a gear motor, SSF devices like the surround sound speakers, a knocker, a tilt bob, and even an air fan. Starting with the solenoids, to achieve realism, they have to be strategically positioned inside the cabinet. You want those solenoids mounted on the side walls or on the floor of your cabinet, not on crossbars. Crossbars limit the amount of force feedback that can be transferred to the side walls where you really want to feel it. This is due to the reduced surface area where force is transferred. Optimal positioning of these solenoids can only be achieved with trial and error. Every vendor out there seems to have a different interpretation of this, which is why virtual pinball machines don't feel the same. The recommended amount of solenoids is 8 plus 2 contactors for flipper actuation. Vendors that actually use 10 solenoids, including flipper actuation, are creating a scenario where those 2 front solenoids are going to fail, since solenoids have a tendency to overheat easily. Using 10 solenoids is ill-advised since flippers do not sound the same as bumpers or slingshots. On the subject of spatial separation, we also have to discuss SSF, meaning surround sound feedback. We're talking about surround sound speakers that are mounted on the inside walls of the cabinet. 2 in the front, 2 in the back is ideal. You do not want to buy from a vendor that only utilizes one set of those. These transducers, also known as exciter speakers, are usually paired with a bass shaker and need to be mounted away from each other as much as possible. Strategically mounted SSF speakers will allow you to hear the ball travel all the way up the playfield, down, drain in the various pockets, and hit the metallic ramps. Avoid at all costs implementations where SSF speakers are mounted at the very front and the other set towards the middle of the cabinet. Let's discuss the shaker motor for a minute. You want that to be on an intensity knob. Make sure that when you shop around, you ask for the gear motor and your shaker motor to be present and on intensity knobs so that you can adjust it to your liking. Just like the placement of solenoids and SSF speakers, the placement of a shaker motor and the gear motor also varies from vendor to vendor and should be tried to understand the difference in touch and feel. Another DOF device we need to mention is the presence of a knocker. Not all vendors offer a knocker, but it is important to recreate the true identity of a mechanical pinball machine. Let's talk for a minute about air fans. Very few vendors offer air fans, and when they do, their implementation is often lackluster. Air fans are important for tables like Whirlwind or Twister that had actual air fans mounted on the top of their back box. Don't forget to ask if the air fan is insulated properly to prevent loud noises, especially since more and more tables that didn't have a fan are now utilizing the air fan in visual pinball. Let's not forget input devices such as the tilt bob and nudging capabilities of a virtual pinball machine. Let's start with the tilt bob. A lot of vendors offer digital tilting, which is not very accurate and should be avoided. Instead, ask for a physical tilt bob that is more accurate, especially since it's easily available and integrated in virtual pinball machines. The location of that tilt bob is also important. You want it in a central location, easily adjusted by hand for sensitivity. Having all of these devices present in a virtual pinball machine is important. Otherwise, you're compromising and you will not achieve the true touch and feel that you're looking for. A lot of people out there lack a frame of reference when it comes to virtual pinball, which gives vendors an easy outlet to cut corners on features their customers don't even know they need. We've actually seen $10,000 units being sold which only had 2 solenoids and no other feedback peripherals. Now let's talk about the features in general when it comes to virtual pinball. We discussed earlier the difference in monitor sizes. Of course, 49 inches being the full-size monitor that we recommend. Anytime you go lower, you're compromising on the depth of the playfield compared to a mechanical unit. We also recommend monitors with a refresh rate of 120 Hz or above. Not to mention, industrial monitors are better than consumer-grade monitors since they are rated for extended use. Having a fire button on your lock bar is also something that we highly recommend since some of the tables utilize this feature. It also makes selecting games and navigating on your menu much easier. You also want a pinball machine that has MagnaSave buttons in addition to the primary flipper buttons. In other words, buttons that are mounted diagonally from each other to prevent accidental presses. One of the features that is often overlooked, but in our opinion important, is the availability of an air fan that is properly insulated. We also recommend looking for units that have on-off switches in easily accessible locations. Those on-off switches would allow you to individually turn on and off different functions such as your rumble, solenoids, shaker motor, gear motor, your tilt bob, your flashers, LED strips, your beacons, not to mention your knocker and air fans. The more individual control you have over your machine, the happier you will be. So look for that and ask if that's available on the virtual pinball machines you are considering. We mentioned this before, intensity knobs are important both on the shaker motor and on the gear motor, primarily because you can actually turn them off completely at night when you don't want to disturb people, which is also true for the on-off switches, of course. But more importantly, everybody has an individual taste when it comes to the intensity of the shaker or the gear motor. So that is an important feature that we believe should be present in every virtual pinball machine that you are going to consider. Let's talk about the volume knob, or volume knobs for that matter, because you have a variety of different volumes to adjust. You have your main speakers, you have your surround sound speakers, and even volume that differs between the tables and the menu. All of that requires, granular volume control. So very important that the machine has volume knobs in the right places, easily accessible. Those are all important questions and considerations. Playing virtual pinball is most enjoyable in the dark, so having large backlit buttons on the front panel is a feature that we also recommend, so that's easy to access and know how to navigate. And don't forget programmable buttons. If you want to future-proof your virtual pinball machine, it's important to have programmable buttons in easy-to-access locations so that you can customize your experience. If you want a virtual pinball machine that really works like a mechanical unit, then you are going to want a functioning coin door with backlit coin door buttons. This goes back to having the correct form factor if you intend on placing your virtual pinball machine amongst regular mechanical units. Don't forget to insist on an extra ball button on the front panel, since tables like Star Trek The Next Generation, Corvette, and similar tables require this feature if you want to buy in a ball at the end of your game. Don't forget to ask for a mechanical tilt bob over a digital tilt bob. It's important that it's located in a strategic place on the inside of the cabinet so that it's central and easily accessible so that you can adjust it manually. Other nice to have features are beacons, either in low format or full size, on and on-off switch preferably. These are important since certain tables actually utilize beacons. They used to have them, such as High Speed Pursuit or the Getaway or F-14. This is something that should be made available by the vendor that you're considering. One of my very favorite features are LED strips, properly positioned around the periphery of the underbody, but also on the back side of the back box. These need to be addressable LEDs, meaning that the game actually controls those LED strips, and those should also be on an on-off switch. So ask for those. It adds a lot of ambiance when you play your machine at night. Same thing is true for flashers. Those can usually be found on the back side above the playfield on the back end of it. Those flashers also are game activated and again add a lot of ambiance to some of those tables, especially tables like Funhouse and Tales of the Arabian Nights, to name a few. Ideally, you want to have 7 of those flashers, 5 RGB flashers in the middle, and then 2 strobe lights on each end. Let's talk about another feature that is important. At least it's a nice to have feature, and that is a topper monitor. The build quality of that topper monitor needs to be considered. Is it just a piece of acrylic with a blank monitor wedged in between, or is it properly enclosed in a metal case? Are there wires hanging out the back? You may also want to ask if the vendor offers custom plungers. If you're going to theme your cabinet a certain way, it's really nice to have a custom plunger that represents that and embellishes it. To what extent does the vendor offer custom artwork design? How many choices of regular artwork is there, and can you have it fully customized to your liking? Last but not least, let's talk about the computer. Is the computer actually built into an ATX case, or is it mounted directly onto the wood frame of the cabinet? Is there a pull-out tray for the PC, or do you have to unscrew the motherboard before you can have it serviced? Those are all little details that amount to a big difference in quality and the way you are going to enjoy your virtual pinball machine. A super important topic is the topic of build quality. So let's discuss this. Virtual pinball machines come in all types of shapes, all types of sizes, but more importantly, in all levels of quality. And you really do not want to be at the bottom end of it. Yes, you're going to pay less money, but you're also going to receive what you pay for. Let's start by talking about plywood versus MDF versus strand board versus particle board. As we mentioned earlier, MDF, strand board, and particle board have sound absorption properties. That means they're not going to reverberate the force feedback devices through the cabinetry the way they should. You really want a cabinet that's made out of plywood, ideally 7-layer plywood, just like your mechanical counterparts. Let's talk about lock bars. The majority of virtual pinball machine manufacturers do not have an actual mechanical pinball machine lock bar. They cut corners. A lot of them put screws on both sides of their lock bar. They end up putting wires that literally connect to the fire button, if they even have a fire button. So when you have to open up your machine for servicing, it's a real pain. Not only will you feel those screws when you put your hands on that lock bar, but you will have a lot more work every time you need to access the inside of your cabinet. You have to unscrew each end. You have to literally disconnect these wires off of the fire button before you can then open up the machine, if they even have a mechanism to open up the pinball machine like a mechanical. What you want to do is find a vendor that has a cabinet that is truly built like a mechanical pinball machine, with a real lock bar that has a handlebar, no wires connected to the fire button. Let's discuss for a second the way the cabinet is built and screw placements. We've seen many virtual pinball machine manufacturers actually place screws that are visible from the outside of the cabinet. That clearly, again, is an indication of low-cost manufacturing. You want the side panels, at least the side panels of the cabinet, to be free of any screws, any visible screws. If you're going to pay this much for a virtual pinball machine, then the least you can expect is a properly designed cabinet. The last but most important quality aspect is the quality and specifications of the computer itself. Not only do you want brand name components, but you want a gaming PC that is future-proofed. In other words, that can actually withstand 1, 2, if not 3 generations of software upgrades in the virtual pinball world. That means the latest and greatest graphics cards, latest and greatest DDR memory, and also a very high-powered CPU. And as we mentioned earlier, ask for it to be enclosed in an actual PC case on a pull-out tray, making your life easy if you need to have it maintained. If a vendor does not list their PC specifications on the product that they're trying to sell you, do not buy from them. Another clear indication of a quality virtual pinball machine is the level of wire management that you will find. In other words, clean layout of all cabling in H channels, super clean access to all the devices. We think this is one of the very top priorities for you to consider when shopping around for virtual pinball machines. We mentioned this earlier. Some vendors offer industrial monitors versus consumer grade monitors. Again, this is all up to you, but industrial monitors are rated to last longer and oftentimes have longer warranties. So if you have a choice, we highly recommend that you select industrial monitors. Last but not least, let's talk about speaker quality and subwoofers. Ideally, you want brand name speakers and of course a subwoofer that is fully enclosed and downfiring, just like mechanical pinball machines. We recommend avoiding units that actually utilize off-the-shelf Logitech subwoofers thrown into the middle of the cabinet for two reasons. First, the constant vibrations will definitely affect electronics on the inside of the cabinet over time. Secondly, it is definitely going to muddy your force feedback output that you're trying to achieve. Now combine that with solenoids mounted on crossbars and you are really muddying the force feedback effects. Let's talk about software. The best virtual pinball hardware is useless without good quality software. So don't forget to ask the virtual pinball manufacturers if and when software is being released, how often is it being renewed, and do they offer it at a decent price. Also, you want to ask if the software is customizable, meaning can you as the end user add your own tables, or is it locked down? For stability reasons, you also need to find out how do they support the software. Do they include a cloning station? Do they send you a second copy of the software? And don't forget to ask them about the features that are included on that particular software they make available. Do they have a jukebox with music videos? Is VR supported? Do they include arcade games? Is 3D stereoscopic table support included? And of course, do they provide 3D glasses? Let's talk about support. First of all, what's the reputation of the vendor that you are considering? Have you scoured the internet? Have you read up on previous customer experiences? Have they been good? Are there complaints about their support? Where are they located? Are they actually on the same time zone that you're in, or are they in a completely different country? More importantly, do they have a dedicated support team that can actually solve your problems? Or is it just the owner that hardly has any time to dedicate to support tickets? We've seen many instances online of owners being short with customers, having no time, getting angry, and pushing customers away. This is not the experience you're looking for, so be very careful before you actually commit to buying a unit that costs thousands of dollars with a company that is either far away or doesn't have a dedicated support team. Go online, go on forums, ask questions, do your research. That will go a long way to avoid a miserable experience and a loss of thousands and thousands of dollars. Finally, let's talk about pricing strategies. This is one of the most confusing aspects of shopping around for a virtual pinball machine. If it wasn't hard enough not to have the knowledge to understand the difference between a high-end and low-end virtual pinball machine, now you have companies out there that are selling, or at least attempting to sell you, a very low-end virtual pinball experience for $9,000 some dollars. As we mentioned earlier, every company out there will tell you that their baby is the prettiest and the best, when in reality, a lot of these companies don't even know what they're talking about. They don't even realize half of the time how poor the product that they have created is compared to a high-end virtual pinball machine. As we mentioned earlier, price ranges start as low as $600 and climb up all the way up to $10,000. If you ask us, it's always better to spend $9,000 on the very best virtual pinball machine you can purchase than to spend $7,000 on a mediocre product that only gets you halfway there. Be aware that various strategies are employed by virtual pinball vendors. You may find a unit that's advertised around $5,000 or $6,000, but by the time you add every feature that you actually need for it to feel real, you're going to end up at $8,000 or $9,000, just like you would if you purchased a unit that has everything included, all in one. Keep an eye out on the PC specifications. That is where the biggest differences in price do occur. Don't forget what we discussed about monitor sizes, refresh rates, brand names, component quality, and of course, build quality in general, not to mention the functionalities and features of the virtual pinball machines. We understand that buying a virtual pinball machine can be a daunting task. We hope we helped you today understand better what makes a virtual pinball machine great. But at the end of the day, if the price is too good to be true, trust me, it is, because nobody can give you a high-powered PC and a high-quality build with industrial monitors and all the features we just discussed for $3,000 to $4,000. It's just impossible. Keep in mind that international shipping is extremely expensive these days, and if you are considering buying a virtual pinball machine from someone in a different country on the opposite side of the world, you are going to be spending money towards shipping rather than the quality of the product. In conclusion, what is it that validates our expertise and ability to talk about this particular subject? What you've heard from us today comes from 10 years of experience in virtual pinball. In fact, we were the pioneers when we introduced virtual pinball to the world on Shark Tank, where we made a deal with Damon back in 2016. We've had over 8 years of trial and error to improve and perfect the touch and feel of our virtual pinball machines, which you can validate and read about on our Google profile, where many of our customers have given us 5-star reviews and are raving about the Ultra VP and Vertigo product line. I'm sure you can see from this video and the effort that we've put into this that we're not just trying to sell you a product, but we're actually passionate about the industry. It is our goal for 2024 to educate the general public about the true nature of virtual pinball and the fact that at the end of the day, you really do not have a lot of choices out there if you want to experience virtual pinball at the same level as a mechanical pinball machine. We've included in the description below a link to a PDF file with our 2024 Virtual Pinball Buyer's Guide checklist. Please download it and use it as a guide to remind you about every individual point we just made in this video. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and feel free to contact us directly if you have any additional questions.